My heart's going to explode. I had this really elaborate beard joke I was going to open with. Frankly, I'm kind of disappointed there weren't more of them, but for the sake of time, I'll skip it. So I was going to segue into the topic of despair. So basically, my 13-year-old nephew can grow a better beard than I can. So, on a serious note, despair is something we've all experienced, especially as Christians. We feel like our world comes crashing down at times. We feel hopeless. It's just, you kind of feel like there's no way out. There's no end to it. And David, King David, he was certainly no stranger to despair. It seemed like every time he turned around, he was being persecuted. He was being chased out of his country by his relatives, his own family, even his surrounding enemies. And he wrote many laments. All you have to do is read Psalms, and you will see many laments that he writes. One of them was Psalms 22. I'm going to read verses 1 through 8. It says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night I find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our fathers trusted. They trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried and were rescued. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind and despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They make mouths at me, they wag their heads. He trusts in the Lord, let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him. And like I said, David wrote many psalms of laments, but he also wrote many praises. His life seemed to be like a roller coaster. He would go from these heroic victories and instant fame to like utter despair and shame. One of these stories about David, now first of all, don't know when this psalm was written. The story I'm about to read, it's not necessarily, he wasn't writing it in this, but I think it parallels it pretty well. 1 Samuel chapter 30. And just to give some context, David, he had gone out, he was living in Ziklag. He had gone out to battle with the Philistines, and he and his men were sent back home. So 1 Samuel chapter 30, verses 1 through 6, says, now when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid against the Negev and against Ziklag. They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire, taking captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but carried them off on their way. And when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire, and their wives, sons, and daughters taken captive. Now keep in mind, there was no Geneva Convention back then. You can only imagine how wives and children were being treated. It says, and then David and his people, and the people who were with him, raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. David's 2 wives had also been taken, and David was greatly distressed. For the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his own sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. Now, as you can imagine, David was having a bad day. He comes home, his house has been burned to the ground, his family's been kidnapped, and now his own men want to stone him. They want to kill him. Like, in one day, his life was turned completely upside down. But, in the last verse, it says, but David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. And just to go back to the psalm we just read, the first part, it says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night I find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. Even in his suffering, he glorifies God. He has no idea why he's suffering. Certainly he can't see any good that can possibly come out of this, but he still submits to a greater power. David always knew who was in control. Another thing about this psalm is that you clearly see Jesus in the very first verse. While Jesus was hanging on the cross in his final breaths, he said these exact same words. Matthew 27, verse 46 says, about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? I've probably heard that verse 1,000 times, but never once did I stop to think about it. It's like, doesn't it seem strange that he would ask this question? That he would ask why God had forsaken him? Didn't he know that was the plan from the beginning? I don't really have a direct answer to this, other than to say that when we read these passages, when we hear about the crucifixion, all we see is physical suffering. We read about the brutal beatings that he took. We can imagine the pain of nails being driven through our hands and feet, hanging on a bloody cross, but that was nothing. That was absolutely nothing compared to being separated from his Father. If you just take a second and think about it, nothing like this had ever happened, ever. God and Jesus had been side by side together even before the universe was created. I mean, when there was nothing. For the first time in eternity, as if we could even comprehend eternity, for the first time in eternity, Jesus was truly alone and at his worst hour. He was hanging and suffering on a bloody cross, and not just suffering physically. You know, think of a time when you screwed up pretty bad. The guilt and the shame that you felt, the disappointment, you felt like you disappointed yourself, maybe your family, disappointed God. Jesus felt that, plus every other time you sinned. Like, just multiply that by 1,000 and then raise that to like the billionth power. That's what he was feeling while he was suffering, while he was hanging on this cross. And worst of all, he had no one to look to. He was truly alone. He was forsaken by God. And for what? I think why is a great question. Why did Jesus die and suffer on a cross for a race of people who continually reject him and spit in his face? It's like, why did he take God's wrath for us on the cross? That is the question we should be asking. It's not why God am I suffering. It's why Jesus did suffer on the cross.
That's good.
Jesus was the only man to ever walk the face of the earth that was truly blameless. He was the only man who ever deserved to live for eternity and be with the Father. But he died. He died in our place. And I feel like so often I forget that. It's like, do I really understand that? Not, he didn't just die. Like, he took God's wrath for me. It was meant for me. It was going to be poured out on me, and he took it. He deserves all the glory, even in our temporal suffering. So maybe you're here, and you've been going through some trials. Maybe you feel like David. Feel like your world has come crashing down around you. You're suffering. You're having a hard time seeing Jesus. Maybe you're asking why, but not getting an answer. You can't see how any good can possibly come out of your situation. Well, let me just encourage you for just a second. Take comfort in the fact that you are not in control. The Father's control is in control, and his plans are far greater than ours ever could be. If we just look at the cross and look what it accomplished, the Jews were looking for a Messiah who was going to physically rescue them, who was going to kill their enemies. They were looking for a Superman, and they were so focused on what they thought God's plan should be, they killed the one who came to save them. But even in their epic screw-up, God's glory shined through. His plan was greater than theirs, and it was greater than ours ever can be. So if you're going through something, let him have control. Stop trying to control an uncontrollable situation, something that's bigger than you, and strengthen yourself in Christ.
Wow.